Snow drifted across the open plains the moment the woman in rags staggered against the wooden gate of Rourke Ranch and slipped to her knees. The newborn in her arms whimpered once, then fell silent. Evelyn Carter had walked farther than any starving body should, but the only thing that broke was her strength, not her grip on the child. When the rancher stepped from the lantern-lit yard and saw her collapse, his breath hitched. Caleb Rourke hadn't expected a miracle tonight, not after 3 winters of burying hope beside his wife and son. But he knelt anyway, boots sinking into frozen mud, and whispered, "Come in. Miracles don't wait outside." Evelyn tried to stand, tried to hand him the child like an apology, but her voice cracked instead. The shame of her rags, of the bruises climbing her neck, burned hotter than the cold. She'd been stared at before, by men who saw her dead husband's debts as chains they could tighten, but Caleb's gaze held none of that. Only concern. Behind him, a girl with dark braids appeared in the doorway, silent and watchful. June Rourke, 8 years old and wiser than most adults, measured the stranger the way orphans measure danger. The wind cut through the yard, rattling the fence posts, carrying a loneliness Evelyn knew too well. Caleb lifted her gently, surprised by how little weight she carried. The child fussed, and Evelyn's panic flashed, fear that she would lose everything she'd crossed half the territory to protect. Caleb noticed. He said nothing, only pulled the door wide. The warmth inside felt like a memory. Evelyn blinked hard. A kitchen table worn smooth by years of use. A hearth that hadn't burned bright in a long time. Boots lined neatly, June's small pair beside Caleb's. It was a home lived in by ghosts and a man who worked hard enough to outrun them. She tried to speak, to apologize for bringing trouble to a stranger's porch, but her voice trembled. Caleb stopped her with a quiet, "Sit. Eat first." He wasn't used to talking much, but grief had taught him how to move with purpose. Watching Evelyn wrap both arms around the baby reminded him of how his wife once held their son on storm nights. June hovered, arms crossed, guarding her uncle's quiet world from this ragged intruder. But when Evelyn flinched at the crackle of firewood, a reflex learned from too many nights expecting pain, June's expression shifted. Suspicion softened into something closer to understanding. Evelyn forced herself upright. She wouldn't be a burden. "I'll leave at dawn," she whispered, voice breaking. "I just needed one night." Caleb's jaw tightened. He had seen runaways before, men fleeing debts, women fleeing men. But this wasn't running. This was survival. And he had buried enough people in Bitter Creek to know when someone was out of chances. Outside, wolves howled in the snow-heavy dark. Inside, he answered firmly, "You're not walking anywhere." Evelyn stared at him, exhausted, frightened, unsure whether to trust the warmth in his voice. But when the baby began to cry and Caleb extended his hands, not to take the child, but to steady her, something inside her loosened for the first time in months. She lowered her head and whispered, "Thank you?" Caleb didn't smile. Men like him rarely did. But he nodded once, slow and certain, as if he'd been waiting 3 winters for someone to knock on his gate and remind the house it was still alive. Dawn crept slowly across the plains, brushing pale gold over the frost-bitten windows of Rourke Ranch. Evelyn Carter woke before the light fully broke, the newborn tucked against her chest beneath borrowed quilts. Her first thought was movement, working, earning her keep, leaving no trace of being a burden. Old fear had trained her well. She slipped from the cot, ankles trembling, and made her way to the kitchen. The hearth still held the whisper of last night's fire. Evelyn knelt, coaxing flame from dying coals with practiced hands. Her fingers, raw from cold and travel, shook as she chopped potatoes, misjudging the blade's weight. When her knife slipped, scraping her knuckles, she swallowed the cry. The sting was nothing compared to the memory of Silas Ward's men gripping her wrists hard enough to bruise. Work. Keep working. That had always been the only safe answer. Caleb Rourke, the cattle rancher who'd taken her an hours earlier, appeared in the doorway, coat half-buttoned. Dawn's light carved the lines on his face, grief carved some, ranch work carved the rest. He paused as he watched her, noticing the tremble in her hands, the way she forced steadiness. He'd seen men on the trail push past exhaustion like that. He'd buried a few. "You don't need to do all this," he said quietly. Evelyn kept her eyes on the pan. "I repay what I take. Always." It wasn't pride, just survival. Caleb didn't argue, but something unreadable flickered across his face, a mirror of the old burdens he carried. He set about fetching wood, his movements slower than usual, measuring her without staring. He recognized that kind of determination, the kind built from years of being told your worth was measured in what you could endure. June Rourke, his sharp-eyed niece, slipped into the kitchen moments later. She took a seat at the table, chin propped in her hands, watching Evelyn with the vigilance of a child who'd learned loss too early. Silence stretched between them until June asked, "Why were you out there? At our gate?" Evelyn's breath caught. She didn't lie, but truth came slowly. "I was trying to get somewhere safe." June frowned. "From who?" Evelyn turned the potatoes, letting the sizzle hide her answer. But the way her shoulders tightened told June enough. The girl's gaze softened just a fraction. By the time breakfast was finished, a dusty rider passed the ranch on the road to town. Caleb glanced through the window and stiffened. News traveled fast through Bitter Creek, too fast. By noon, he knew someone would be asking about the woman he'd taken in, about the baby she guarded like a shield. Sure enough, when Caleb stopped by the barn to saddle his horse, he found old Tom Willis hobbling up the path, breathless. "Caleb, heard a stranger came your way last night. You ought to know someone's in town askin for a woman in rags carrying a newborn. Said she stole from him." Caleb's jaw clenched. He didn't need the name. Evelyn's flinch at every loud sound had already told him enough. Inside the house, Evelyn nearly dropped the kettle when Caleb returned. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Someone's looking for you," he said. Fear flashed across her eyes, raw, silent, practiced. Caleb took one step closer, grounding his voice like an anchor. "Whoever he is, he won't be the one who decides what happens now. Not here." Something in her broke at that, not from fear, but from a kind of kindness she hadn't known in years. The baby whimpered, and she held him tighter, as if bracing for the past to break down the door. But Caleb simply nodded once, steady as the land beneath them. "We'll handle whatever comes," he said. "Together, if you'll let us." The storm rolled in before noon, swallowing the plains in a gray, unbroken wall. By the time Caleb Rourke shuttered the last window, the wind was already howling hard enough to shake the ranch house. Snow hammered the roof, sealing them in. It wasn't the first blizzard to trap the cattle rancher indoors, but it was the first with a stranger, and a newborn, beneath his roof. Evelyn Carter sat near the hearth, rocking the child she'd carried across miles. Firelight trembled over her face, revealing exhaustion, bruises, and a resolve carved from too many nights of fear. June Rourke, usually restless during storms, sat across from her with wide, cautious eyes. The girl wasn't afraid of the blizzard. She was studying Evelyn, trying to decide whether this woman meant danger, or needed saving. Hours crawled by. Snow thickened. Wind screamed through the chimney like a warning. With nowhere to hide behind chores or distance, silence pressed them together. Caleb finally broke it. "You said someone's looking for you," he murmured. "Storms bought us time. Might be wise to tell me what kind of trouble's comin'. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the baby's blanket. She looked down, not gathering courage, just finding the least painful truth. "I wasn't running for myself," she said softly. "I was running for him." June leaned forward. "The baby? But he's not." "No," Evelyn whispered. "He's not mine." The admission trembled out like a secret she'd carried too long. Caleb didn't move, didn't push, just waited, steady in a way only a grieving man could be. Evelyn stared into the fire. Shadows danced across her face as she spoke. "Silas Ward, he wanted this child. His mother died owing him money. Ward said the baby could pay it back someday, farm work, or something worse." Her voice broke. "She begged me to take him. Said no child should start life owned." Caleb's jaw tightened. He knew Ward's type, men who turned debt into chains. Men Bitter Creek feared but never confronted. "You took the boy," Caleb said quietly. "I promised his mother I'd protect him." Evelyn's eyes shone. "But Ward saw me as part of the payment too. He said my husband's debts were mine now. That leaving was stealing." June's voice was small, uncertain. "Is he coming here?" Evelyn didn't answer. She didn't need to. The fear in her eyes said enough. The wind slammed against the house, rattling the shutters. Caleb stood and added another log to the fire, movements controlled but sharp, like a man forcing down memories of the wife and infant son he couldn't save. "You did right," he said. "And you're not alone in it anymore." Evelyn blinked, stunned by the certainty in his voice. She'd expected judgment. Distance. Not this quiet, unwavering defense. June rose and crossed the room, hesitant but determined. She held out her own blanket, thin, patched, cherished. "For the baby," she said. "Storm nights get cold." Evelyn accepted it with shaking hands. Something fragile shifted between them, trust, or the start of it. Outside, hooves crunched faintly through snow. A shape moved at the edge of the storm. Caleb's face hardened. "Riders," he said. Evelyn's breath caught. June stepped closer to her uncle. The blizzard had trapped them, but it had trapped their enemy with them too. And by Caleb's tightening grip on the rifle at the door, it was clear he planned to protect this house, this child, and the woman who had brought both into his life, no matter what waited in the storm. By the time the storm thinned enough for shapes to form beyond the yard, Evelyn Carter already knew who would be riding toward Rourke Ranch. The dread that tightened her breath wasn't panic, it was recognition. Men like Silas Ward didn't let what they claimed slip away. Caleb Rourke stepped onto the porch first, rifle steady, breath clouding in the sharp morning air. Snow still drifted in slow, heavy sheets. Behind him, June hovered at the doorway, small shoulders stiff with worry but refusing to go hide like he'd told her. The child had learned loss too young, she would not be pushed aside from danger now. 3 riders approached, coats dusted white, horses blowing steam. Silas Ward led them, every inch the well-groomed land broker Bitter Creek pretended to admire. Up close, though, even the cold couldn't hide the cruelty in his grin. "Morning, Rourke," Ward said, voice smooth as oiled leather. "I'm here for property that belongs to me." Caleb didn't lower the rifle. "You're on my land. Best choose your next words careful." Ward's eyes flicked toward the window, where Evelyn's silhouette trembled just out of sight. "Woman came to me in debt. Ran off with something valuable. I'm only claiming what's owed." Caleb's jaw tightened. "People aren't debts." Ward smirked. "Law don't see it that way." Caleb took one step forward, snow crunching under his boots. Grief had carved quiet into him, but that quiet held iron. "Then the law can come speak to me itself." Ward's smile faltered, faint, but enough. He hadn't expected resistance, not from a rancher who lived half-wild with ghosts. Inside the house, Evelyn pressed the baby closer. She wanted to run. She wanted not to cost anyone anything. But when she shifted toward the back door, June Rourke stepped in front of her, chin high, eyes burning with the same stubbornness Caleb carried. "You leave," June whispered. "He wins." Evelyn's breath stuttered. That was the truth she'd been avoiding for miles. Outside, Ward's charm cracked. "I'll return with papers," he snapped. "Sheriff will see them proper. You can't hide a thief." Caleb didn't blink. "She's not a thief." Ward leaned close enough that frost from his breath clung to Caleb's coat. "You think shelterin' her makes you a hero? You're digging your own grave." Caleb didn't raise his rifle. He didn't have to. The steadiness in his eyes was enough to send Ward's horse dancing back a step. "Leave," Caleb said, voice low. "Storm ain't over." Ward reined his horse sharply, fury flashing before he masked it with a smile. "Enjoy your borrowed trouble, Rourke. I'll be back." The riders turned, disappearing into the drifting white. Caleb stood motionless until they vanished completely. Only then did he step inside. Evelyn waited at the table, shoulders shaking, expecting disappointment, maybe even regret, for dragging danger to the only safe place she'd known in months. But Caleb simply set the rifle aside, pulled off his gloves, and knelt so he could meet her eyes directly. "You don't run from men like that," he said quietly. "You face them, with people willing to stand beside you." Her breath caught. "I never meant to bring this here." Caleb shook his head. "You didn't bring trouble. Trouble followed you. Difference." Snow settled in soft whispers over the roof. Inside, something steadier settled into place, an unspoken pact, a fragile alliance. For the first time, Evelyn didn't reach for the door. She stayed. Dawn broke pale and brittle over the plains, the kind of cold that made every sound sharper. Evelyn Carter sat at the kitchen table, the newborn tucked close, listening to the tense quiet that had settled over Rourke Ranch since Silas Ward's visit. She had spent the night clutching the child in the thought that she should leave, slip out before Caleb or June paid the price for defending someone who didn't belong to them. She'd done it before. Disappearing was how she survived. But when she stood to pack the small bundle of things she owned, a soft voice stopped her. "Don't." June Rourke stood in the doorway, hair tangled from sleep, her small jaw set in the stubborn line she shared with her uncle. "If you leave now, he gets everything he wanted." Evelyn's chest tightened. Children shouldn't sound so old. Outside, a distant thunder of hooves rolled over the snow. Not the storm's wind this time, but men. Caleb Rourke stepped onto the porch before either of them reached the window. The cattle rancher, quiet, broad-shouldered, still carrying the grief of losing his wife and infant son, didn't shout for help or retreat. He simply squared his stance at the gate. His silence was its own warning. Silas Ward returned with 4 riders. No legal papers. No sheriff. Just men who did the kind of work that never made it into ledgers. Ward's voice carried. "Last chance, Rourke. Hand over the woman and the baby. You can keep your pride." Caleb didn't lift his rifle. He didn't need to. "My pride isn't what's in danger here," he said. "You are." The riders shifted in their saddles. "Caleb." Evelyn stepped onto the porch behind him, trembling, baby in her arms. "He won't stop. You shouldn't risk this." He turned, meeting her eyes with a steadiness that rooted her to the floorboards. "You brought life back into this house," he said. "I won't let a man like him take it out." Before Ward could retort, small boots thudded across the porch. June marched to Evelyn's side, cupping the newborn gently but firmly so Ward could see. "He's ours," she said, voice bright and sharp as broken glass. "Family now." That single sentence broke something in the air. 2 of Ward's riders exchanged glances, uneasy, unwilling to cross a line they hadn't expected to be drawn by a child. And from the road behind them, townsfolk emerged, first Tom Willis, then Mrs. Hartwell, then 3 ranch hands whose land Ward had tried to squeeze in years past. Word traveled fast in Bitter Creek. So did old grudges. One of the men spat into the snow. "Ward, you got a talent for pickin' fights you don't win." Ward's bravado cracked. His horse danced sideways. He saw something shift in the crowd, a balance he no longer controlled. Wisely, or bitterly, he chose retreat. "You'll regret this," he hissed at Caleb. But his voice held less certainty than the wind. He yanked his reins, and the riders turned back toward town. Only when there were specks on the horizon did Caleb exhale. Inside the house, Evelyn lowered to a chair, shaking with a release she couldn't name. She'd lived months expecting the next blow, the next demand, the next escape. She had no idea what it felt like for danger to leave instead of take. Caleb knelt beside her, not touching, just close enough she could feel his warmth through the cold morning. "You don't have to run anymore," he said softly. "Not from him. Not from anyone." Evelyn looked down at the baby, then at June, then finally at the man who had stood between her and the darkest chapter of her life. Her voice cracked. "I don't have anywhere else." Caleb shook his head gently. "You do now," he said. "If you want it." For the first time in a long, punishing year, Evelyn believed him.